What are you
get
talking
triggered
about?
by the Sly Favon comments. They be seeing Sly Favon. I think they trolling me.
No reason, I just don't see the comments no more.
Cameras captured the aftermath.
This man, a passenger in that car, frantic at the sight.
We want to begin now with some breaking news. Rapper Lil Durk.
Stop scrolling, because this isn't just another rapper headline. This one feels final. Cold, heavy. The kind of news that hits your chest before it reaches your ears.
Criminal lawyer, and I just learned that the rap artist Lil Durk just had his motion to dismiss his for hire case denied. To be honest, I'm not that surprised. Let me tell you guys something. There's only two ways that Lil Durk is rocking out of that federal courtroom on 2 feet. A jury of 12 people says that he is not guilty, or President Trump pardons him. There's no other way that Durk is walking out of that court free. That judge is not going to be dismissing any key evidence. He's not going to be dismissing any motions. He's not going to do anything that significantly helps Lil Durk walk out of that courtroom without having a trial. Now, how and why am I so sure of this? Well, here's the first thing I want to tell you. Most federal judges used to be federal prosecutors, exact prosecutors that are prosecuting Durk. A lot of judges used to stand in that very position. Federal prosecutors can be very biased people, and very rarely, once they put on that black robe and become a judge, do they get rid of those biases, okay? That judge very likely probably thinks that Durk is guilty. He just can't be the one they actually say.
When whispers started spreading about Lil Durk and his sentencing, fans didn't panic at first. They froze, because the energy was wrong. No hype, no chaos. Just a quiet dread sliding through timelines, like everyone already knew what was coming, but didn't want to say it out loud. This wasn't gossip. This felt like the end of a chapter nobody was ready to close. Then came the farewell tone. Cryptic posts. Emotional lyrics resurfacing. Messages that didn't scream goodbye but felt like one. The kind of moments that make you wonder if something already happened behind closed doors and the public just hasn't caught up yet. And here's the unsettling part. This didn't feel rushed. It felt prepared. Like the script had been written long before the cameras turned on, people started asking uncomfortable questions. Was this really it? Was the outcome already locked in? And why did it feel less like sentencing news and more like a final bow? This wasn't loud chaos. This was quiet consequence. And once you understand how we got here, how the streets, the system, and the spotlight collided, you'll realize this wasn't sudden at all. It was inevitable. It didn't land like breaking news. It landed like confirmation. When updates about Lil Durk and sentencing began circulating, the internet didn't explode, went quiet. That kind of quiet, where people already feel the outcome before the details arrive, fans knew. Something was off long before any official words hit screens. The tone around his name had changed. Less bravado, more reflection, less noise, more weight. This wasn't a sudden storm, which was a pressure system that had been building for months. And when pressure builds in public, release never feels random. The first signs weren't headlines. They were vibes. Lyrics being reinterpreted. Old interviews replayed with new ears. Lines that once sounded defiant suddenly felt like foreshadowing. The music didn't change, people's understanding of it did. That's when the farewell energy crept in. Not a goodbye. Not an announcement, just moments that felt heavier than usual. Subtle acknowledgments. Gratitude-laced posts. A tone that said, if this is the last chapter for a while, it meant something. Fans started connecting dots that weren't drawn for them. And when the audience starts doing that, it's usually because the artist already did. Social media filled with that uneasy mix of support and dread. Half the timeline praying for a miracle. The other half bracing for reality. Nobody wanted to be dramatic, but nobody wanted to be naive either, because the system doesn't care about discographies. People outside the fan base reacted differently. Some dismissed the emotion as performative. Others called it overdue, and a loud few treated it like entertainment. because distance makes consequence easier to watch. That split reaction said more about the audience than the artist. Behind the scenes, the context mattered. Years of scrutiny. Public narratives colliding with private realities. Every move analyzed through the lens of what happens next. The spotlight didn't just follow him, narrowed, and when the spotlight narrows, escape routes disappear. Sarcasm online tried to soften the blow. Jokes about the system always winning. Comparisons to movie endings nobody wanted. Dark humor. Because humor is how people cope when the stakes feel irreversible. But even the jokes felt tired, because this wasn't a viral scandal. It was a slow reckoning. And slow reckonings don't trend, they haunt. The conversation shifted to legacy, not chart positions, not features. Legacy. What survives when momentum stops? What matters when applause fades? Those are questions fans ask when they're preparing for absence. That's when the emotional farewell theme stopped being speculation and started feeling intentional support, poured in from peers, not loud endorsements, but quiet acknowledgments, subtle messages, lines about strength, resilience, faith. The kind of posts that don't confirm anything, but don't deny gravity either, and silence from certain corners felt louder than words. Critics argued that emotion shouldn't shield accountability. Supporters countered that humanity doesn't disappear when consequences arrive. That debate never resolves it, just circles. What made this moment different was how prepared it felt. Artists facing uncertainty usually lash out or lean into bravado. This felt measured, reflective, like someone making peace with possibilities they can't control. And that scared people more than panic ever. Fans began treating each appearance like it might be the last for a while. Clips were archived. Performances rewatched with that bittersweet lens reserved for finales. Nothing was announced, but everything felt commemorated. That's not coincidence. That's intuition. The public tried to demand clarity. Timelines filled with what's really going on. Posts. But clarity doesn't arrive on demand, especially when the outcome sits in rooms far from microphones, so speculation filled the gap. Some claimed the fate was already sealed. Others insisted hope remained. Both sides spoke with certainty, because uncertainty is uncomfortable and confidence feels safer. Even when it's borrowed, the reality sat somewhere colder. Legal processes move slow and end fast. One day, you're waiting. The next day, you're adjusting. That whiplash is brutal, and fans could feel it coming. The emotional weight didn't just belong to the artist. It belonged to the community around him. People who saw themselves in the rise, the struggle, the survival. When that arc stalls, it hits personal. That's why this wasn't just news, it was shared grief in advance. Online, comparisons flew. Some said it felt like watching a season finale with no cliffhanger, just a hard stop. Others said it made reality TV look merciful. The sarcasm landed because the truth underneath was heavier and still. No grand statement came. No defiant speech. No denial tour. No dramatic announcement. Just a presence that felt steady in the face of instability. That steadiness unsettled people because it suggested acceptance. Or preparation. Or both. When artists know something is coming, their energy changes. They slow down. They focus inward. They say thank you more than usual. They look people in the eye longer. Fans pick up on that, whether they want to or not. This felt like that. The farewell tone wasn't literal, it was emotional. A closing of one era, even if another might open later. That nuance mattered, but nuance rarely survives online. Headlines simplified. Comment sections polarized. The story turned into extremes because extremes travel faster than balance. Yet, beneath the noise, a quieter understanding spread. Whatever the outcome, something had already shifted. The relationship between the artist and the audience had deepened through vulnerability, not triumph. That's rare in a culture obsessed with winning, and that's why this moment cut so deep. It wasn't about guilt or innocence in public discourse. It was about consequence, about how fast momentum can pause, about how systems don't bend for sentiment. The farewell feeling didn't mean the end of a career. It meant the end of certainty. And certainty is the most addictive thing fame provides. As updates continued to trickle in, the dread sharpened. Not panic clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when possibilities narrow and outcomes loom. People started speaking in past tense without realizing it. That's when you know the story has crossed a line. Because when the audience starts grieving before anything is final, it's not because they know the verdict hits, because they understand the stakes. And once stakes feel this high, the next chapter never arrives quietly. It arrives with consequences. The moment the emotional tone went public, the internet shifted gears from concern to obsession. This stopped being about updates and turned into a real-time vigil. Every post was scrutinized. Every lyric was treated like a coded message. Fans weren't just watching anymore, they were decoding, and then the reactions poured in. Artists, Leave Soto, producers, and industry voices started speaking without really speaking. Prayer hands, broken heart emojis, captions about strength during storms. Nobody named names, but the message was loud enough to hear through the noise. This wasn't celebration. This was solidarity. Memes tried to break the tension, but even the jokes felt nervous. You could tell people were laughing with one eye open. Sarcastic posts comparing the moment to a season finale nobody asked for. Dark humor calling it the system, reminding everyone who's in charge. Was comedy with a lump in its throat, because beneath the jokes was panic. Fans started treating timelines like a courtroom. Lobby, waiting, refreshing, reading between lines that weren't written. And every time someone claimed to have inside info, it spread like wildfire, then evaporated. Just as fast, hope and dread traded places every hour. Celebrity reactions escalated the emotional whiplash. Some voices spoke up clearly, calling for fairness, humanity, and perspective. Others stayed deliberately quiet, which somehow said more. Silence, once again, became a statement, whether intended or not. The absence of loud industry. Defense unsettled people. That's when public outrage started bending in different directions. One side questioned the justice system and its patterns. Another side pushed back, saying accountability isn't optional just because someone is beloved. The arguments got loud, but they didn't cancel each other out. They collided. And in that collision, the conversation grew bigger than one artist. This became about cycles. About how success doesn't insulate you. About how the spotlight doesn't protect you from consequence, magnifies it. People drew parallels to other careers, paused mid-stride. Other moments when momentum met reality and lost. The pop culture. Comparisons went nuclear. Some said this felt like watching a championship game end with the lights shutting off mid-play. Others compared it to a final episode where the hero doesn't get redemption, just a cut to black. It made reality TV look scripted and merciful. Every analogy landed because none of them felt exaggerated enough. The music itself became part of the conversation. Streams surged. Old projects climbed charts again. Lyrics that once sounded like survival anthems were now treated like confessions carved into stone. Fans weren't just listening, they were memorializing. That surge wasn't celebration. It was preservation. The instinct to hold on to something when you think it might be taken away. And that instinct spread fast. Public outrage then fractured into something more complex than anger. It became protective. Fans defended legacy. Critics demanded realism. Commentators tried to sound balanced and ended up sounding hollow, because balance doesn't trend when emotions are this raw. Media coverage reflected the chaos. Headlines leaned into words like emotional, farewell, and fate, even when nothing had officially concluded. The language alone shaped perception, and perception became reality for millions watching. That's when the sealed narrative took hold. Not because of paperwork, because of posture, because of tone, because of how everything suddenly felt weighted. The idea that the outcome was inevitable spread faster than any confirmed detail ever could, and inevitability is terrifying. The conversation spilled beyond music into culture. Debates about systemic issues, about cycles of violence and consequence, about whether the industry does enough to protect artists from the environments it profits from. Those conversations didn't have neat answers, but they had volume. Meanwhile, the artist at the center of it all stayed largely composed in public view. No dramatic breakdowns, no explosive reactions, just a steadiness that read as strength to some and resignation to others. That dual interpretation fueled everything, because when someone appears calm in the face of looming consequence, people project meaning onto that calm: acceptance, preparation, faith, or simply exhaustion. No one could agree, and that disagreement kept the story alive. Outrage peaked not with shouting, but with silence. The kind of silence where people stop posting jokes and start posting prayers. Where sarcasm gives way to sincerity. Where the timeline feels heavy. Like everyone collectively lowered their voice. That's when you know a moment has crossed into something real. The emotional farewell narrative stopped feeling speculative and started feeling communal. Fans spoke as if this chapter was already closing. Messages of gratitude flooded in. Stories about how the music helped them survive, cope, endure. It was less fandom and more testimony. And testimony carries weight at the same time. Critics pushed back hard against the idea of romanticizing consequence. They warned against turning legal realities into mythology. That tension between empathy and accountability became the central argument. Neither side fully won, because both sides were reacting to the same fear. Loss of presence, loss of momentum, loss of certainty. When something familiar threatens to disappear, people argue over meaning instead of outcome. The outrage didn't burn out. It evolved. It became quieter, more focused, more serious. Less meme-driven, more reflective. The kind of outrage that doesn't scream but sits with you. And as the dust swirled, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about sentencing. It was about what happens when a public figure's future becomes a question mark. Instead of a promise, that uncertainty hit harder than any verdict could. Because verdicts end conversations. Uncertainty extends them. By the time attention began to drift elsewhere, the emotional imprint was already set. This moment had redefined how fans looked at the artist, the industry, and the system around both. And when perception changes at that scale, the aftermath doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives slowly, with consequences that don't trend but last. When the dust finally settled, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like a long exhale after holding breath for too long. Whatever the outcome, the moment had already done its damage, its defining work. The story stopped being about updates and became about adjustment. For Lil Durk, the shift was immediate but quiet. Not a collapse, not a disappearance. Just a noticeable pause where momentum used to live. The kind of pause that forces reflection whether you ask for it or not. Public perception changed in layers. Fans didn't stop supporting him, but the tone matured. Less hype, more reverence. Less celebration, more acknowledgement of weight. It felt like people stopped yelling his name and started speaking it carefully. That's not loss of love. That's recognition of gravity. The industry reacted with restraint. No loud distancing. No dramatic endorsements either. Just calculated stillness. Invitations became more selective. Conversations more private. Futures discussed in hypotheticals instead of timelines. When the industry goes quiet, it's not ignoring you. It's reassessing that reassessment carried consequences no headline could capture. Collaborations paused. Schedules adjusted. Plans rewritten with contingency language. Not canceled, just uncertain. Uncertainty is the most disruptive force in a career built on momentum. Critics framed the moment as inevitable. Supporters framed it as tragic. Both perspectives stripped away the myth of invincibility. Success, it turns out, doesn't shield anyone from the system, just makes the fall more visible. That realization hit fans hard. The community around him didn't just react. Emotionally, they reorganized. Support became louder, but more grounded. Less fantasy about outcomes. More acceptance of reality. People stopped predicting miracles and started preparing for absence. That emotional maturity marked a turning point. The music took on new meaning again. Not as prophecy, not as farewell, but as documentation. A record of survival, conflict, contradiction. Fans stopped listening for answers and started listening for truth. And truth doesn't always resolve nicely. The broader conversation shifted too. This moment forced uncomfortable questions about cycles, how talent rises from chaos and sometimes gets pulled back into it. About how systems profit from stories of struggle, but rarely protect the people inside them. Those questions didn't trend long, but they stuck. Media coverage softened in volume but sharpened in tone. Articles referenced the moment as context rather than crisis. A remember when anchor that subtly reframed future discussions. Legacy started being discussed in the present, tense instead of the future. That's a dangerous shift for any artist. The farewell energy didn't mean goodbye, meant recalibration. Careers don't always end loudly. Sometimes they bend. Sometimes they pause. Sometimes they transform in ways nobody expects. But transformation requires time. And time is the one thing uncertainty steals. For the artist, the consequences were personal before they were professional. Public life slowed. Private reflection deepened. When the noise fades, what's left is reality. And reality doesn't care about charts. Fans noticed the change. Appearances felt heavier. Words chosen more carefully. Gratitude expressed more openly. None of it screamed defeat. It whispered awareness. Awareness changes everything. The audience learned something too. Idolization softened into empathy. Distance closed. People stopped treating the story like content and started treating it like consequence. That shift doesn't reverse easily because once fans see the human cost, spectacle loses its shine. This moment didn't end a career, but it altered its trajectory. The path forward no longer looked straight. It looked conditional, and conditional paths demand patience most audiences aren't used to giving. Still, patience arrived. Not from everyone, but from enough people to matter. As weeks passed, the story stopped trending, but didn't disappear. It became part of the background narrative. A reminder, a reference point. Something future moments would be compared against whether anyone wanted that or not. That's how legacies get complicated. The farewell tone that once felt premature, now felt prophetic not because of outcome. Now felt prophetic not because of outcome, but because of understanding. Something had already ended long before any final decision. The illusion of certainty, and certainty is the currency of fame. Without it, everything feels slower, heavier, more deliberate, but sometimes more real. The final impact wasn't punishment or redemption. It was perspective. Perspective on fragility, on systems, on how fast applause can turn into silence and how loud that silence can be. This story didn't close with answers. It closed with awareness. Awareness that careers aren't guaranteed. That momentum is borrowed, that the spotlight gives and takes without warning. And most importantly, awareness that some moments don't need a verdict to change everything. They just need to happen. The future remains unwritten, but it no longer feels wide open. It feels earned, conditional, dependent on time and transformation. And that's the quiet truth behind the headlines. Not fate sealed, but fate rewritten. If you're still here, don't pretend this didn't hit different. This wasn't just a headline. You watched a moment where momentum slowed, certainty cracked, and reality stepped into the spotlight uninvited. So do what the algorithm. Smash that like button like it owes you back rent and an apology. No hesitation. Because stories like this deserve to be seen, not buried under dance trends and fake beef. Now I need to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this inevitable? Tragic? A system doing what it always does? Or a moment that forces everyone, fans and critics alike, to finally sit with consequences instead of arguing over them? Say it honestly. Say it respectfully. Say it loud. And if you're watching without subscribing, fix that immediately. Hit subscribe like you don't want to miss the next chapter when this story inevitably evolves. Because in hip-hop, nothing ever ends clean. It pauses, shifts, and comes back louder. Turn on notifications if you want these breakdowns while the conversation is still forming. Not after everyone rewrites history and pretends they saw it coming. We don't chase trends, we explain them. Because this culture moves fast. And the truth usually moves quietly underneath it all. Remember, fame doesn't freeze time. Success doesn't cancel consequence. And silence doesn't mean the story is over. This wasn't just a moment. It was a warning. And this is the rap truth. Rap truth.